If you asked most people why some men become rich and others remain workers all their lives, they would give you a moral answer. They would say the rich were more disciplined. They would say they worked harder. They would say they were more confident, more resilient, more strategic, more willing to delay gratification. There is some truth in those observations, but I have spent too much of my life around money to stop there, because what most people call an explanation is often only a description of what success looks like after it has already happened. That is one of the oldest mistakes in the world. A rich man often does look calmer. He often does look more disciplined. He often does look more strategic. He often does look more willing to take risks. The question is whether those traits were the true engine of his wealth, or whether wealth, stability, trust, and margin made those traits easier to display in the first place. That is a much harder question, and it is the question most of society avoids because it leads to a conclusion people do not like hearing. The conclusion is that a great many of the rules ordinary people are taught to follow are not wealth rules. They are worker rules. They are rules designed to make you useful to a system, dependable to an employer, predictable to authority, legible to bureaucracy, and easy to manage inside a hierarchy. That is not nothing. A society does need dependable people. A business does need employees who show up, follow instructions, and keep the machine running. But you must understand something if you want to become rich. The traits that make you a reliable worker are not always the same traits that make you an owner. And the rules that produce obedient workers rarely produce extraordinary wealth. That is the beginning of wisdom. Most children are taught some version of the same script: go to school, get good grades, follow instructions, respect authority, do not take foolish risks, find a stable job, work hard, keep your head down, save what you can, retire someday. It is a respectable script. It is also a script written for life inside an existing system, not for controlling pieces of the system itself. That is the difference. A worker is trained to fit into a structure. An owner is trained, either explicitly or by family example, to question the structure, rearrange the structure, profit from the structure, or build a new one. Those are different educational projects. One creates discipline, the other creates strategic leverage. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it with clarity because if you mistake the first project for the second, you can spend 20 or 30 years doing everything you were told, and then wake up one morning confused about why you are useful but not free. That is what happens to millions of people. They followed the rules and got the outcome. The rules were built to produce. They just thought the rules were designed for a different prize. The real secret of getting rich begins with seeing that difference clearly. You have to understand what game you are actually being trained to play. If you are told from childhood that the point of school is to become employable, not dangerous to incumbents, not difficult to manage, not strategically independent, then school may help you in many ways, but it will not by itself teach you how wealth is really built. It will teach you how to perform. It will teach you how to memorize. It will teach you how to satisfy external standards. It will teach you how to wait for evaluation. It will teach you how to seek permission. Those are not useless skills. But none of them, by themselves, reliably produce wealth. Wealth is usually built through ownership, leverage, negotiation, asymmetry, reputation, and the intelligent use of risk. Those things are not absent from school because they are unimportant. They are often absent because they are difficult to standardize, difficult to control, and not especially useful if your aim is to produce a large population of orderly, compliant, moderately anxious participants in a wage system. That is why I say becoming rich often requires breaking their rules, not the criminal law, not your moral center, not the rules that protect innocent people from harm. I am talking about the invisible rules of social obedience, The rules that say a safe salary is superior to uncertain ownership. The rules that say debt is always bad rather than sometimes a tool. The rules that say asking for permission is more virtuous than creating facts on the ground. The rules that say fitting in is safer than standing apart. The rules that say loyalty to the script matters more than loyalty to your long-term economic position. Those rules are powerful because they are taught so early and so often that people stop recognizing them as choices. They begin treating them like reality itself. That is the first illusion you must break. A rule is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is just a social technology for keeping the hierarchy predictable. When I was younger, I believed hard work was nearly everything. I still believe it matters enormously. But hard work inside the wrong structure is often just expensive loyalty. A man can work 60 hours a week for 20 years and still never become truly rich if every hour simply increases the value of something he does not own. That is the central problem. The worker sells time. The owner acquires claims. The worker seeks security through continuity. The owner seeks upside through structure. The worker is told not to question authority. The owner learns that authority is often negotiable, influenceable, delayable, or bypassable. The worker is told to avoid risk. The owner learns to price risk, divide it, finance it, transfer it, and take only the kind that has asymmetric reward. These are different languages, and if you do not learn the second language, you remain trapped inside the first, no matter how sincere your effort is. Take the rule about stability. It sounds wise. Find a stable job. Stay there. Move up carefully. Collect benefits. Do not gamble your future on uncertainty. Very sensible, very comforting, and completely incomplete. A job can disappear. An industry can shrink. A boss can change. A company can decide you are a spreadsheet line instead of a person. A pension can be diluted, frozen, or replaced. A skill can be commoditized. A stable path is often only stable from the point of view of the institution receiving your labor. To you, it may simply mean concentrated dependence on someone else's decisions. I have always found it remarkable that people are taught to fear entrepreneurship or ownership because it is uncertain, while treating total dependence on one employer as though it were the height of prudence. That is not prudence. That is a different kind of risk. It is just a socially approved risk. And socially approved risks are the easiest ones to miss because they arrive wearing the costume of normal life. This is why one of the first mental rules you must break if you want to get rich is the worship of stability for its own sake. Stability is valuable only if it is stable for you. If it only stabilizes your role inside somebody else's machine, then you are not acquiring wealth. You are renting calm. That is not the same thing. Now, let me say something that many people misunderstand because they hear it too crudely. Rich people use debt differently. Ordinary households are often taught a very simple rule. Debt is dangerous. Live within your means. Avoid borrowing. There is great wisdom in that rule for consumer behavior. If you use debt to consume what does not produce value, you are borrowing against your future to decorate your present. That is one of the easiest ways to stay poor, but the wealthy are not taught that all debt is evil. They are taught that debt is a tool, and like any tool, it can be destructive in foolish hands and immensely powerful in skilled ones. Consumer debt usually weakens the poor asset-backed or cash flow. Linked debt often strengthens the rich. That is not magic, it is structure. If I borrow to buy a wasting asset that drains cash, I have increased fragility. If I borrow to control a productive asset whose cash flow services the debt and leaves something extra, I may have increased my ownership faster than wages alone ever could. The difference is not the existence of debt. It is the direction of the cash flow. This is why I say poor people are often taught to fear all leverage, while rich people are taught to manage leverage. One set of rules says, do not borrow. The other says, borrow carefully when the asset, the terms, and the downside make sense. Those are different educations. And the second one is far more useful for wealth. The same pattern appears in how people are taught to think about authority. A great many ordinary people are raised to believe authority is fixed, rules are fixed, institutions are fixed, and the world is basically a system of gates where the good life belongs to those who wait politely, qualify properly, and are eventually let through. That is a worker's understanding of the world. It is not entirely wrong. Many gates do exist. But the wealthy, from a very young age, are often shown a different reality. Authority can be negotiated, rules can be interpreted, timelines can be accelerated, outcomes can be influenced, exceptions can be arranged, introductions can solve what credentials alone cannot. What the poor experience as a wall, the rich often experience as a conversation. That difference is not only about money, it is about socialization. It is about whether you were raised to believe the system is something you obey or something you work on. That is why so many people who later become rich look like rule breakers. Often they are not breaking the form. They are breaking the social expectation that says normal, approved, obedient behavior is the highest form of intelligence. It is not. For a worker inside a hierarchy, obedience can be adaptive. For an owner trying to escape the hierarchy, obedience can be fatal. There is a sentence I wish more young people understood early. You do not become rich by becoming the best behaved person inside a structure designed to keep you dependent. You become rich by moving toward ownership, asymmetry, and leverage, often before the people around you think it is respectable. That is why getting rich usually feels socially risky before it feels financially intelligent. The crowd likes paths that already have moral approval. Wealth often requires paths that only receive moral approval after the outcome is visible. That is a different emotional journey. Take hard work. This is where people become most confused. They hear someone say hard work will not make you rich and assume the point is laziness. That is nonsense. Hard work matters. What I am telling you is that hard work is only one ingredient, and by itself, it often makes other people rich if ownership is not attached to it. A man who works tirelessly in a business he does not own may produce a good life. Some savings, maybe even great pride. But the real upside of the system is still flowing elsewhere. A man who works hard while building something he partly owns, while learning how money compounds, while understanding tax treatment, while using risk selectively, while moving toward higher value networks, may receive a very different payoff for the same number of exhausted hours. That is why the rule "work hard and you will succeed" is one of the biggest half-truths in the world. Hard work is often necessary. It is rarely sufficient. Ownership matters, structure matters, position matters, timing matters, and perhaps most of all, what game your labor is serving matters. If you are tired but not building claims on future value, then your effort may be noble but economically misdirected. You need to understand that early. Now, all of this creates a very uncomfortable question. Why are people taught the worker rules so aggressively? Because a society needs workers. Businesses need employees. Institutions need people who comply, not merely people who question. Governments need tax-paying, rule-following participants. And most families, if they do not themselves possess wealth or ownership experience, can only pass down the wisdom they know, which often means the wisdom of caution, obedience, and respectability. I do not say that with contempt. Caution makes sense if your margin is thin. Obedience makes sense if one misstep could cost you your livelihood. Respectability makes sense if you are trying to survive a world in which social punishment is expensive. But surviving and getting rich are not always the same project. That is the thing the system almost never says plainly. If your goal is simply to remain respectable, employed, and moderately safe, then many ordinary rules are good rules. If your goal is to become truly wealthy, you will have to violate some of those expectations. Again, not by becoming a criminal, by becoming unconventional, by becoming difficult to classify, by choosing ownership over status at moments when status is more publicly admired, by choosing long-term asymmetry over short-term approval, by tolerating social disapproval, by letting people think you are strange, reckless, arrogant, or unrealistic for a while. Most people cannot tolerate that stage. That is one reason most people do not get rich. They would rather preserve belonging than pursue leverage. I understand that emotionally. I do not recommend casual rebellion. But if you are asking honestly why wealth clusters in the hands of people willing to do things others are not, that is one of the answers. They can tolerate being misunderstood longer. They can tolerate criticism. They can tolerate temporary incoherence in their life story. They do not need the crowd to tell them they are allowed to continue. That is a huge advantage. There is another false rule you must break if you want to become rich. The rule that says permission comes before action. That is a worker's sequence. Wait for the job offer. Wait for the promotion. Wait for the approval. Wait for the degree. Wait for the recommendation. Wait to be told you are ready. Owners, builders, and people who become wealthy through initiative often reverse that sequence. They act first, then tidy the permissions later. They build before every credential is granted. They sell before every observer thinks they are qualified. They negotiate before they feel entitled. They ask for forgiveness much more often than they ask for permission. This is not lawlessness. It is initiative. And initiative is one of the most undertaught wealth traits in ordinary life, because institutions do not generally want populations optimized for initiative. They want populations optimized for compliance and manageable competence. That is why the social penalty for initiative can be so high early on. You may be told you are too aggressive, too self-promotional, too opportunistic, too non-traditional, too willing to ask, too willing to move, too willing to question. All of that can feel ugly if you are still seeing yourself from the point of view of the system that trained you. It feels very different once you begin seeing yourself from the point of view of ownership. Another rule worth breaking is the belief that all good paths are obvious paths. They are not. Many of the best wealth building paths look odd at first because they sit outside the approved narrative. An ordinary salary can feel more respectable than an early-stage business with uncertain cash flow. A prestigious degree can feel more respectable than a direct sales career with ownership upside. Saving politely in a bank can feel more respectable than buying a productive asset on sensible leverage. Staying in your city can feel more respectable than moving toward a place where luck, networks, and capital are denser. But respectability and wealth are different outcomes. I want you to keep that distinction very close. Respectability is a social reward. Wealth is an ownership reward. Sometimes they overlap. Often they do not, at least not at the beginning. You must decide which one you are optimizing for. Now let me be fair. Breaking their rules also carries danger. A great many foolish people break rules, not because they are strategic, but because they are impulsive. That is not what I am arguing for. I am not telling you to violate contracts carelessly. I am not telling you to take reckless debt. I am not telling you to abandon discipline. I am not telling you to harm people, dodge lawful obligations in stupid ways, or imagine that ethics do not matter. In fact, ethics matter tremendously because wealth without integrity corrodes the owner. What I am telling you is subtler and more important. You must separate actual wisdom from socially convenient obedience. You must learn which rules protect you and which rules domesticate you. You must learn which conventions are designed for your benefit and which are designed for your manageability. That is a higher order form of intelligence than simply following or rebelling. It is selective disobedience. Selective disobedience is how owners think. They obey the rules that keep them legally safe, reputationally credible, and structurally strong. They ignore or bypass the rules that exist mainly to keep them conventional, timid, and dependent. That is a very different posture toward life, and it is much closer to how wealth is actually built. If I had to reduce everything I have learned about this subject into one plain sentence, it would be this. The path to wealth usually begins when you stop asking how to become a better behaved employee and start asking how to acquire claims on future value in ways that the average obedient person never even studies. That is the turn. Ownership, leverage, negotiation, networks, portable skill, selective risk. All of these sit on the far side of the social rules meant to keep you safe, legible, and ordinary. The world will often punish you socially before it rewards you financially. That is part of the price. People may call you unrealistic. They may tell you to settle down. They may ask why you cannot just be content with a stable path. They may accuse you of changing, becoming too ambitious, becoming too focused on money. Let them speak. A great many people defend the rules that limit them because attacking the rules would force them to question the life they built around obeying them. Do not let their comfort become your ceiling. If you truly want to become rich, there are probably 3 things you will have to do that ordinary social conditioning discouraged. You will have to think for yourself about which rules deserve your loyalty. You will have to move toward ownership instead of only wages, and you will have to tolerate looking wrong, strange, or disrespectful for a season while your life is still too early to be publicly understood. That is not an easy path, but it is the real one. And once you see it, you can never again mistake obedience for wisdom or approval for progress. That is why becoming rich requires breaking their rules. Not because all rules are bad, because the rules that keep you useful to the system are not always the rules that make you free from it. There is one last distinction worth making. A safe life and a rich life are not always built by the same logic. The safe life usually asks for predictability, approval, and narrow error. The rich life usually asks for asymmetry, initiative, and a willingness to look imprudent to people who are still judging by worker standards. That does not mean you must become reckless. It means you must stop assuming that social obedience and financial assent are naturally aligned. Very often they are not. Very often the rules that keep you welcome inside the system are the same rules that keep you from owning enough of it to become free.